Hi everyone, PV here, and welcome to today's YouTube video. And in today's video, we're going to continue our review of Innistrad Crimson Vow. We're going to go through the blue cards. So in the previous video, we did the white cards. So if you missed that, make sure to check it out. I'll post the link in the description. And yeah, today we're going to do blue, which means we're going to go through every single blue card in the set, and I'll talk about potential applications, how good I think these cards are, how influential they're going to be, and so on. The focus of the review will be constructed, mostly standard, but sometimes historic if the card is particularly good in historic. I will mention if something is very interesting for a limited, but the focus really is going to be constructed. And because we're talking about every single card, and not every single card has constructed applications, sometimes I'm just gonna, speed through a couple of them and just say, yeah, this is just clearly a limited card, and then we're gonna move on and focus on the ones that are actually interesting for constructed. The first card we have is Alchemist's Retrieval, and that is basically a glorified Disperse, right? I don't think it's good enough for Constructed, especially given the pedigree of bounce that we have access to right now. Where you have Fading Hope, for example, that's a really good bounce spell. So Alchemist's Retrieval is not going to see any play. Cemetery Illuminator. This card is kind of interesting. It has a lot of layers to it that you start learning about the more you think about it. If it's on, it can be really good, right? Because it's a 2/3 flyer for 3, but you get to play an extra card on your turn and on their turn. And it does work on both turns, right? It's only once each turn, but it's not only your turn. So say if you have an instant on top, you get to play it on their turn, and that can be quite good. But at the same time, it doesn't work on lands because it's cast and not play. And sometimes it's just not going to do anything, right? If this is just the first card that you play, then you're not even going to have anything to exile, right? Let alone the right type. And sometimes you're going to exile something, and the top card of your deck will be a different thing. So it's going to take a while before it actually gets going, which to me means it's probably not good enough, unfortunately. If this had Flash, then it might be good enough. But right now, I don't think it's good enough, but it is a very complex card. So it could see play in ways that I'm not imagining. It could end up being better than I think it is. Chill of the Grave is basically a limited card. Cobalt Lancer is actually kind of interesting. A 3/3 for 1 mana is pretty good, but obviously you can never play it on turn 1, or unless you're playing an older form where you go turn 1 Street Wraith this, which doesn't seem that worth it. But also, if you do mill or discard it, you can pay for and exile it to draw a card. So it does have some applications that I think are interesting, but overall, I don't really see where I would play this. I don't know what a deck for this looks like. So I think it's not going to see much play. Even though it's a pretty cool card. Consuming Tide. I think if you are into this effect, you probably would rather play something like River's Rebuke, because you really want to return everything. And mostly the decks that want this kind of effect are the ones that want to break battlefield stalls. Right? So you have 6 creatures that have 6 creatures, and then you play the bounce everything and you kill them. Or you just you get to an unlosable spot. Basically, I don't think Consuming Tide is going to do that very often. So maybe if you're a deck that is very light on permanence and you're playing versus some deck who is very heavy on permanence, then this is going to be good enough, right? Because you do keep, let's say if you only have one on-land permanent in play, you do keep one and you bounce all but one of their permanents. If their permanents are all kind of equivalent tokens and stuff, it might be good, but I don't really see where I would play this. Cradle of Safety. It's an expensive Snakeskin Veil, basically. We'll probably not see play, but it's a card we've seen before already, right? And it hasn't seen any play, but maybe if there are some discounts and incentives for enchantments you want to play, but probably not. Cruel Witness, I think this is clearly a limited card, right? Not going to see any constructed play. Diverse Cab, same thing. Drellite Monstrosity, same thing. Drink Shackle Geist. This one is yet another one of those I just wish it had Flash. And it's kind of interesting because every single spirit in the set seems to cost 3, right? There seems to be a real cluttering of spirits in the 3-drop, which means that they all got a little bit worse because of that, right? Like cards that would normally be good enough if they were a different spot of the curve will not be good enough because they cost the same thing as an already good card. And this is the same problem that the white cards have. Right, every single good white card costs 3, so it's just impossible to play all of them. This one is reasonable for racing, but doesn't do much more than that. So you're really just if you want to play this, you're really trying to play it because it's a spirit and you need spirits. And again, there are already so many better 3-mana spirits that I don't really think you want to play this very much. But you know, if your opponent has a tapped creature, it basically does work like a Shriekmaw, right? You play this, you tap it. You make it not untap, and then it's just not going to untap until this lives play. So if you're playing versus someone who cannot remove it, it can actually be pretty good. So yeah, I think this has some potential, but we'll probably not see play. Fear of Death. This is mostly a limited card. Geistlight Snare. This card is actually quite interesting because if you can have a spirit early on, it becomes a Mana Leak. Mana Leak is a pretty good card, but you do really need to play something on turn 1. And I'm not sure how reliable that is, right? In Standard, it's actually pretty hard to do that. In older formats, it's not that hard, but then you have other alternatives, right? You have, most spirits have flying, so there are some cards that are similar but work with flying instead of spirits that might be even easier to turn on. And I'm not sure there are going to be enchantments that will support this, right? If you have enchantments and spirits, then yeah, it just works, right? It costs 1 mana to counter something unless they pay 3. That can be pretty good. But I just not seeing what the spirits enchantments deck looks like, right? It seems like the idea is obviously that you have the spirits and then they die, the spirits will disturb and then become enchantments and then they still count for this type of effect. But I still don't see what this deck looks like. There's no benefit to just being spirits, right? There's no like good spirits lord or something like that. There are no good 1-drop spirits, right? So I think this deck is just lacking a lot in Standard. And then if you go to like Pioneer Spirits and stuff like that, then you just have better choices, right? You don't need to rely on this enchantment synergy because you have better spirits. So I'm not sure this has a home anywhere. Geralf Visionary Stitcher. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with Disturb tokens, right? Not Disturb, Decay tokens. So I don't know what the potential applications for this are. If there is a zombies deck, then it might see play because giving all your zombies flying is pretty good. And there's some legendaries in that deck. You can sack them to make some zombies. But overall, I feel like you're mostly going to be getting something worse than what you're sacrificing for the most part. Right, so I don't really see why you would want to play this. Hullbreaker Horror. This card's very good, I think. It's very easy to just play it at the end of the turn. It can't be countered, and then you untap and you win the game. The problem is that for a 7-mana card, it doesn't win the game on its own, right? You still need other stuff. You need to be able to do other stuff. But if you have any other stuff, it's just so easy to take complete control of the game. Because they try to play a big spell, you just play anything, any instant speed spell, and you bounce it to their hand, right? And then they attack with a creature, you bounce that too. And it's a 7/8. Like, and it has flash, it just ambushes people a lot, right? Imagine you're playing a mono green deck, your opponent passes with 7 mana up, can you even attack with your 5/5? You probably cannot, right? So I think this card is almost certainly going to see play. I think it's a pretty good sideboard card for control matchups, and it might even be good in the main deck because it just ambushes things and it just makes it so easy to win the game. The thing is that you want instants. If you have it, right? It's really good with instants. They don't even have to be cheap instants because you untap with it and then you just start doing stuff already. But if you have, say, a Consider, you can always just wait until you get to 8 mana, play this with Consider up. They can't counter it. So if they try to do anything, you can bounce something, or you can even bounce itself, right? If they try to kill it, it can bounce itself with your Consider. So I think this card is almost certainly going to see play. I think this card's quite good. Inspired Idea. This is a pretty cool card that I don't think is quite good enough. It will act as, 3 mana, draw 3, discard 2 a lot of the time, or discard 1. It can be good with Wizard class if you have no maximum hand size, but Wizard class is already sort of a divination, and then this is another divination, and how many divinations can you really play? Right, so I think this is not gonna see any play, but it is a very, very cool card. Lunar Rejection. If you're targeting wolves and werewolves, this can be quite good. I think 2 mana, bounce something and draw a card is pretty great. But it does compete with stuff like Into the Royal and all the variations like Blink of an Eye or whatever. And these cards were never that good. They were just passable. And this is, as a whole, this is going to be worse, I think, unless people play a lot of wolves and werewolves. Right, so it's mostly a limited card at this point. Necroduality. This card is pretty cool. I don't know how good it is, though, because like the zombie decks, they seem to be on the cheap side of things. So you want to be playing your zombies early, right? So you play a zombie on turn 1, a zombie on turn 2, a zombie on turn 3, then you play this. Then it's like, well, I don't even have any zombies left, right? So in a different tribe, this might have been quite good. And a lot of the zombies are tokens as well, right? A lot of the things that are creating zombies create zombie tokens, and this doesn't work on them. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is good enough to see play in a zombies deck. I'm not sure if the zombies deck is good enough. It is a very powerful effect, so we've seen it before, right? But it costs 5 and worked with any tribe. Now it only works with zombies and it costs 4. 4 is a lot less than 5 for a card that has to be in play before you do your other stuff, right? So it's a very meaningful change, but I'm still not sure how good this is. I think it's not good enough, but I will be trying it out because it's a very flashy and powerful effect. Overcharged Amalgam. I love this card. I wrote an article for StarSeedGames.com on this card, and it, some different applications. I think this card is quite good because it works in many different ways, right? It's 3/3 flash flying. It's such a better body than what we've seen before with this card. Like Mystic Snake was a 2/2, Frilled Mystic was a 3/2. They were both quite good, right? And harder to cast, and much worse bodies. This is actually a real body, which means that you can ambush people with it, right? Sometimes your opponent's going to attack with a 2/2, you'll play this and kill the thing, right? And you're left with a 3/3 flyer. And sometimes they'll play Auron's Epiphany, you'll play this second 1/1 and counter that Epiphany. Right, so I think this card can be quite good. I think it's good in zombies. It's a zombie, and zombie has replaceable tokens that you can just sacrifice that would die anyway with decay and stuff. So I think it's quite good there, and it's even good in like blue-white flyer decks because again, worst comes to worst, you just play it as a 4-mana 3/3 flyer. But in the best case scenarios, you're gonna play that, sacrifice your 1-drop, and counter their sweeper or counter their epiphany or their dragon or something. And again, this does do other things, right? First, you can sacrifice itself, right? A lot of people don't know that. So you play it and you exploit itself, and you get to counter something. So again, worst case scenario, it's a split card, 3/3 flash flying or a 4-mana cancel, right? And then it's not actually cancel; it's disallow. It can also counter activated or triggered abilities like Planeswalker emblems and stuff like that. So I think this is the sort of effect that we see very rarely. Which means people don't play around it, which means they really, really get got by it when it happens. So I think this card is super interesting. I don't know the best home for it yet, but I know that I'll be trying it out because I really like it. Patchwork Crawler. This card is pretty interesting. It does a bunch of different things. And like you can think, I'm gonna discard Griselbrand on turn 1, then play this, then exile it, and get my 3-mana Griselbrand. But overall, it doesn't seem like it's quite good enough at doing that. So I think you want a more fair application of this, right? If you have creatures that you already played that have good abilities, that happen to be good to copy, that will find themselves in the graveyard. So this seems like it's pretty hard to work, basically. So I think it's just not worth the trouble. It is a fun card, more than a competitive card, I think. Repository Scab. I think this is pretty clearly a limited card. Scattered Thoughts. This card is actually not that bad, but given that Memory Deluge exists, you need to be like really, really into putting stuff in your graveyard to play this instead of that. Like and Behold as well, right? Behold the Multiverse are both, I think, better card than Scattered Thoughts, but mostly the Deluge. Screaming Swarm. I think this is also a limited card. Self-Hoffen Tumber, also limited card. Serpentine Ambush, same thing. Skywrap Scab, same thing. Steelclad Spirit, also a limited card. Stitched Assistant, not necessarily a limited card, but I think this suffers from the fact that there's a Scorpion that we're going to see in the black cards, right? That is basically the same thing, but better. It draws more cards. And black is also much better at producing fodder for exploit. So if you are playing a blue-black deck, like if you're playing the exploit deck, I think there's going to be blue-black, and you're just going to want to play the Scorpion instead of the Stitched Assistant. So I don't think the Stitched Assistant has a home. Stormchaser Drake. This card's very cool. It works on auras, right? If you target it with anything, you draw a card. And I think that's potentially pretty powerful. In the right shell, right? I have played plenty of, Season of Growth and stuff, and decks that wanted to target my creatures. The problem is these decks are almost never blue. right? They're usually a green-white combo, sometimes red. Like, they're usually Naya colored, and this is a blue card. So I'm not sure what this deck looks like, but it is interesting. I will keep it in mind, basically. Syncopate. I think Syncopate is potentially good. Exiling seems like it will matter right now, and it is good to have a counterspell that you play on 2, and that is not dead later on. I don't know if it's better than Jawari Disruption. Like, the flexibility on Jawari Disruption makes it so good. And that's already a 2-mana counterspell, which is the reason you're playing this card, is so you can cast on turn 2. Right, but maybe Syncopate is good enough to see more play. I think I'll almost certainly see play somewhere. It will fight with Disruption a little bit, but the fact that you can play later in the game as well, I think makes it pretty okay. Siphon Essence. I don't think this card is good enough to play. Like, a blood token is not valuable enough to restrict what you're countering. Right? I would much rather just play a cancel type card in a spot like this. Unless you're really just splashing for you only have 1 blue mana, but I don't see how that's going to happen. Like, you would rather play this Disdainful Stroke or Negate or something at that point. Theory of Discovery. This card is quite good if you can support it, right? You have to be playing a 1 or 2 color deck for this to be good. But for example, there's a mono blue Delver deck. They can very easily play this card, right? You're going to have a lot of basic lands to discard. So I think the fact that it's an instant makes it pretty okay. I'm into this card. You have to have a lot of basics, right? So even your 2-color deck sometimes might not be able to play this, depending on how many utility lands you're playing. Like, nowadays we have, this blue-red decks, for example. They're playing a lot of basics, but they also have, like a lot of modal spells, Backfield Hazard, Shadow Scroll Smashing. They have the creature lands, the Hollowstorm Giant. So I'm not sure they can actually play this. I don't know if they have enough, but it's a cool card to keep in mind. Wenderlight Spirit, limited card. Wash Away. This card is basically, counter target Alrund's Epiphany for 1, or counter anything else for 3. Right? And is that a good enough place to be? I'm not sure, because by the time they cast the Epiphany, you should have 3 mana already. Right? So you don't necessarily get that much by having this discount, because at the time the discount happens, means you don't need the discount anymore. If there are other synergies that other cards that you can get with this, then it might become good, right? If there is more stuff that casts from the graveyard, for example, like Memory Deluge, that's a card that, even Galvanic Iteration gets cast from the graveyard a fair bit. And you can also play Elite Spellbinder, for example. If you play Spellbinder, my card, and you take something and they try to cast it, you can counter it for 1 mana. So this is the type of card that can see play and might not see play, depending on what's happening in the format, right? If people are playing people are cheating on their cards a lot with Foretell and Flashback and stuff, then it's going to be good. Otherwise, it's going to be worse than the other 3 mana counter spells that you can play. Whispering Wizard. This is just a limited card. Winged Portent. This card is interesting. I'm not really into playing it for 6 mana because 6 is a lot. But there might be a deck that just wants to play it for 3, right? We have had decks where everything is a flyer. So, they're usually blue-white, and they play a bunch of 1-mana flyers. And then this can be a 3-mana, draw 3, or draw 4 at instant speed. We can be quite good. The problem is that it costs double blue, and these decks are usually heavy white and not heavy blue, right? But there might be, there might be a blue deck full of 1-mana flyers down the line that actually wants to play Winged Portent. Witness the Future. I don't really know what this does. Let me read it again. Okay, so it's a 3-mana sorcery impulse, but there's some shuffling involved. Yeah, that's not good enough. Wretched Thong. This card, I think, is probably better than it looks, but not good enough. Like a 2-mana 2-1 that replaces itself every time you sacrifice it and is a zombie is not that bad, right? But it's also not good enough, I don't think. But it would not shock me if this card saw constructive play. Like, I think, most people will look at it and think, clearly for limited, but it is actually feasible that this is constructive play if you have enough sack outlets, and if you want zombies specifically. I wouldn't hold my breath, but I think it has some interesting potential. And now the flip cards, the blue flip cards, which are outside the alphabetical order on the WotC website, so I'm going to follow that. Binding Geist. This is basically limited card as well, right? Biolume Egg. Biolume Egg is kind of interesting. You get a 0/4 that scries 2, and then when you sack it, it becomes a 4/4 with a weird ability. Like, if you were getting a benefit out of sacking it, it is actually a good deal, right? Imagine that you have a card that says, sack it to do X. Then for 3 mana, you get to scry 2, do X, and get a 4/4, right? That's actually quite reasonable, right? The downside is that, obviously, when you can't sacrifice it, you're just getting a 0/4, right? Even if you can sacrifice it like 2 turns later, you've wasted your 3-drop a little bit, or it's a creature that isn't attacking for 2 turns. So I think this is better than it looks, but I don't know if it's good enough. Right now, the bar is really high, right? But it is a pretty interesting card. Gutter Skulker, I think limited card. Jacob Hawken Inspector. I think this is the new Jace, right? And it's interesting to note that one thing that I did not realize immediately is that when you flip this card, then you can cast a spell for free, right? You don't have to pay its mana cost. So this is actually a pretty good thing, right? You if you flip it, you get an extra card every turn, but also a free card every turn, which is very relevant because you probably exiled something expensive with your first activations, at least. Right, so this does have the potential to just take over the game. Right, you play it on turn 2, and then on turn 6, you get to flip it and already cast something great. Right, it doesn't have to be on your upkeep. So I think it's a good card. I don't know if it has a place right now because you do rely on your O2 surviving. It's relatively weak to bounce as well. They can bounce the backside, but it does have a lot of potential, I think. I don't know where I would put it. Like, I don't know where I would just put this card in. I don't think you would see play in any constricted deck that exists right now. But I think it is a pretty powerful card. Lender Bearer. I mean, it's a 1-mana, 1/1 spirit, right, with flying, which can be a pretty good thing if you have a spirits deck. I think the spirits deck is not good enough. It doesn't strike me as good enough, but if it is good enough, then you get this card, right? It just doesn't feel like there is enough payoff for being spirit. There are not enough lords. Then you'd want to play a 1-mana 1/1. Mirror Hall Mimic. This card is also relatively interesting. The backside of it can be game winning, but overall it is just a clone, and those haven't been very good in a while. Mischievous Catgeist. This one is actually cool as well. I think, you get to... It's a 2-mana creature that they have to deal with, so if they don't have a blocker or they can't kill it, then you're just going to be drawing cards. The backside is not going to be super relevant early on. It's hard to, get it to work. It costs 3 mana. But it is a cool card. I don't think it's going to see play, though. I think you're better off playing, the Stowaway, for example, if you're looking for that sort of effect, right? But it is cool, and it is a spirit, so it is worth paying attention to. Soul Cipher Board. So it enters play with 3 Omen counters in it, and let's make sure I know what it does. It's a pretty wordy card. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be that great. It's just too expensive, and it doesn't do anything. Right, so you have to be... I think you have to be flipping it immediately, basically, for it to be good. And even then, it's not that good. So I think this is an overall pretty poor card. So blue. Blue in this set is quite weak. I would say it's remarkably weak. There's no card that I'm sure is going to see play. Like in white, for example, we had Talia. It's like, yeah, obviously this is going to see play. And like Valorous Stance, which is very likely to see play. In blue, there's just nothing, right? Which is kind of weird, but not an unwelcome change of pace, right? Because blue is pretty strong right now. The blue-red decks are one of the best decks. So it's maybe a good thing that there aren't a lot of good blue cards. The cards that I think are most likely to see play are Hullbreak Horror. I think that's a pretty good finisher. We were lacking a flash finisher in this format, and it's at least going to be a good sideboard card. It's just a very powerful card. And Overcharged Amalgam, which is very versatile, can be very, very good in many different spots in the game. It can go in every deck because it does require creatures, right? but I think in the right deck, it can be a pretty powerful card. And then you have stuff like, Syncopate might see some play, Thorough Discovery might see some play, but Wash Away might see some play, but everything is sort of situational and may or may not see play. Like, the only card where I'm relatively confident we'll see some play is the Horror, and even that, I might just be wrong on it. It might just not see play. So overall, not a great showing for blue. If you like my work and want to support me a little bit more, make sure to check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/PVDDR, and there you can support my work and get some extra perks on top of it, such as access to an exclusive Discord server where you can ask questions, talk to me, vote on topics for the next videos, and stuff like that. And special thank you for my biggest supporters. Adam Renzi, Adam Camilleri, Clicks, Foxy, Fernando Vizeu, John Jam, Jack Hart, Joey, Calvin Peng, Kevin Masse, Lawson, Mattia Giardini, Nate, Safa Rappin, Silvia Letizia, Stu Cameron, Thomas Pokorny, Dimitri, and Willie Linton. I really appreciate the support, and I'll see you next video.